Rain pounded on the asphalt as flashing blue lights illuminated the night. A young woman stood at the edge of the pier, drenched, her hands trembling but her eyes steady as steel. Her name was Harper Lane. The officers moved in quickly, weapons lowered but ready. She didn't flinch when they grabbed her arms and pulled her down to the ground. The cuffs snapped around her wrists, cold and unyielding, but she didn't protest. One of the officers muttered that she was lucky they hadn't shot her outright. The words bounced off her like rain off a hull. She had been through worse. They said she was impersonating a Navy SEAL, a felony under federal law. The uniform she wore was authentic down to the smallest detail, even the trident pinned to her chest. The problem was that there was no record of her ever serving in the Navy. No record of her in any SEAL team, no official history at all. Her file was blank. The officers thought she was some kind of con artist, maybe an obsessed fan who went too far. But the way she carried herself, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering, unsettled them more than they admitted. They brought her into the Naval Investigative Command facility just outside San Diego. She said nothing as they processed her. No name, no explanation. The agents interrogated her for hours, asking how she got the uniform, where she'd gotten her training. She refused to speak, her silence sharper than any weapon. One agent lost his temper and slammed a hand on the table, demanding an answer. She only looked up, her lips barely moving, whispering that the sea remembers. That was all she said. By morning, the report had reached the base commander, who was furious that someone had managed to infiltrate restricted zones wearing SEAL colors. He demanded she be charged and made an example of. But the story didn't end there. Before the formal paperwork could go through, word of the arrest reached Admiral Daniel Keene, head of Naval Special Warfare Command. The name Harper Lane caught his attention like a ghost from the past. The Admiral walked into the holding area that afternoon, the sound of his boots echoing down the corridor. The agents straightened up when they saw him. He didn't acknowledge them, just gestured to unlock the door. Harper sat in the corner, her face bruised, her hair tied back in a rough knot. She didn't look up when he entered. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. Something about the set of her jaw, the scar under her left eye, it all looked painfully familiar. He finally spoke, asking her where she got the tattoo. She raised her head slowly, her eyes meeting his, and without a word, she rolled up her sleeve. There it was, a black ink trident wrapping around an anchor with an inscription in faded script. It wasn't the typical Navy SEAL insignia. It was older, an internal mark, given only to those who had served in an off-the-books unit during a classified operation a decade ago. The Admiral felt his throat tighten. He remembered that mark. Only 12 people in the world had it. 11 were buried at sea. The 12th had vanished in Somalia, presumed dead. Harper Lane. The agents didn't understand what they were witnessing. The Admiral leaned in, his voice low, asking her where she'd been all these years. Her eyes flickered, and for the first time, she spoke clearly. She said she'd been doing her duty. That when her team went down, she kept going. That someone had to finish what they started. Her words hit like waves breaking against stone. The Admiral dismissed the agents and sat across from her alone. She told him about the years she'd spent underground, about missions she couldn't talk about because even the Pentagon didn't have clearance. She'd been working under an unofficial directive, protecting intelligence assets tied to the same op that had been erased from history. When the system failed her, she didn't quit. She went rogue to protect what was left of her team's legacy. The Admiral listened in silence, every muscle in his body tense. When she was done, he stood up and said that the tattoo was authentic. The agents outside were stunned when he ordered her release. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. That tattoo's authentic. No one questioned the Admiral's authority. Within minutes, Harper's cuffs were removed, and she was escorted out with silent respect from the very men who had arrested her. But the Admiral wasn't finished. He followed her to the pier where she'd been caught. The sea was calmer now, the sun bleeding into the horizon. He asked her what she was doing there that night. Harper told him she was waiting for someone. The last piece of an operation that had gone wrong years ago. A name she refused to share. She said there was one more loose end, and she intended to tie it up before disappearing again. The Admiral warned her that the world she once knew didn't exist anymore. The Navy had changed, the teams had changed, and people like her, ghosts, weren't supposed to walk free. Harper smiled faintly and said ghosts were the only ones who could go where the living couldn't. She looked out over the water, her eyes reflecting the orange light. Later that night, The Admiral sat alone in his office, staring at her old file. It had been sealed under Level 7 clearance. The official record said Harper Lane was Kia in 2015 during Operation Silent Reef. But now she was back, alive, carrying secrets that could shake the very foundations of the command. He poured himself a drink, watching the ice melt as he replayed her words. The sea remembers. 2 days later, an encrypted message reached Naval Command. It contained coordinates deep in the Pacific, attached with a single word, finished. When they sent a recon drone to the location, they found the wreck of a foreign surveillance vessel that had been missing for years. On its hull was the insignia of a black ops organization known only to a handful of people in Washington. The message had been sent from a device last registered to Harper Lane. The Admiral knew she was gone again. He didn't issue a pursuit order. Instead, he filed a report marking the matter as resolved. In his private log, he wrote that Harper Lane had completed her mission, the last of her team to fall silent. Then he locked the file and ordered it sealed for another 50 years. Months later, sailors on a patrol ship near Guam reported seeing a woman on a small fishing vessel at sunrise. She was alone, steering toward the open ocean. They tried hailing her, but she didn't respond. As she passed, one of the sailors noticed a faded tattoo on her arm, a trident curled around an anchor. He swore it looked real. They watched her disappear into the mist, swallowed by the horizon. The Admiral received that report but never filed it. He knew she didn't want to be found. Sometimes, when the sea breeze carried that faint salt smell into his office, he'd look out toward the water and imagine her out there, still keeping her silent watch. There were whispers afterward. Some said she had been part of a classified rescue that saved hostages in the Middle East but was erased from the books. Others said she uncovered corruption at the highest levels of command. No one knew for sure. All they knew was that a woman who was once arrested for impersonating a SEAL had proven herself more authentic than anyone wearing the uniform. The agents who'd mocked her in the interrogation room stopped talking about her altogether. The one who'd slammed his hand on the table transferred out quietly. The Admiral never mentioned her again in public. But deep down, every man and woman who had seen her knew that something extraordinary had walked through their walls that night. Years later, a young recruit at Coronado found an old photo tucked inside a sealed training manual. It showed a dozen operators in desert gear, smiling under the blazing sun. In the middle stood a woman with that same scar beneath her eye and the same calm in her gaze. On the back of the photo were 5 words written in faded ink. "The sea never forgets you." The recruit took the picture to the Admiral, who was long retired by then. He looked at it for a long time, his eyes glassy with memory. He told the recruit to keep it, to remember that sometimes the bravest heroes are the ones no one ever knows existed. Then he folded his hands and stared out at the waves. Out there, somewhere beyond the reach of maps, Harper Lane lived on, not as a ghost, not as a myth, but as a soldier who had refused to die before her duty was done.